So we welcome you all yet again to our still unlocked series with the Himalayan Institute of Cultural and Heritage Studies. And it gives me immense pleasure having Dr. Lokesh Ori, who's a cultural anthropologist in our midst today. He has a doctorate in anthropology from South Asia Institute, University of Heidelberg, Germany. His latest book, which I hope I will procure soon for our library till Kingdom comes, deals with what he'll be talking about today. And today he'll be talking about ritual politics in Mahasu's Himalayan kingdom. He has published several other works on the Himalayas. He promotes slow and community-based tourism through his popular platform, Been There, Doing That. And that's a very, very good title, Doing That. So, Dr. Ori, over to you. We are eagerly waiting for your talk today, and please go for it now.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Sonali Gupta. Thank you for having me here this evening. And I'm very grateful to your organization, to your center, the Himalayan Heritage Center, and all these people who have joined this evening. And so I think I didn't pronounce the name correctly. It is the Himalayan Institute of Cultural and Heritage Studies. So I'm very grateful to the Himalayan Institute of Cultural and Heritage Studies and Dr. Sonali Gupta for having me here this evening. So I'm going to talk to you about Mahasu and ritual politics in the Western Himalaya, which is what my research deals with. So currently I've worked for the past 7 to 8 years on ritual politics and how the Devi Devta system in the Western Himalaya deals with the politics of today, how it deals with modern democracy and how it dealt with political systems in the past. So I'm going to be talking to you about the Devi Devata system in the context of one particular deity called Mahasu. So just to give you a brief background of what the Devi Devta system is. So the Devi Devta system is very prevalent in parts of the Garhwal Himalaya, in the Kumaon region of the Himalayas. And of course, these little kingdoms, which now form a part of Himachal Pradesh, but which were during colonial times referred to as the Punjab Hill States. So there were several Punjab Hill States, and most of these hill states, they came under British rule after the Anglo-Gurkha War of 1815. And when the British came into Dehradun, first of all, and defeated the Gurkhas, who had occupied parts of Himachal, parts of Uttarakhand and Himachal, and then spread towards the Punjab hill states like Jubbal and Nahan, Sirmaur, and of course from the other side they came into Shimla. So most of these little principalities, as they are called, they were ruled by, or they were, one could say, they were controlled by human kings. But there were also certain principalities that were that did not have any human king. They did not have any ruler who could be identified as a king. And the de facto ruler of these areas was a devta. He was a divinity. And when I say divinity, I mean he was an idol, basically an idol placed inside a temple in complete secrecy. And of course, the devta or the idol inside the temple had his officials. He had an officialdom, he had ministers, he had soldiers to fight for him, he had priests to pray. He had tax collectors and paraphernalia that is required for a kingdom to become viable. And of course, he had the oracle, he had the human voice. So he would possess some of his oracles who would then become his voice, and he would would express the will of the deity or the Devi or the Devta. And so this is how the system worked. My hunch is, I have not been able to prove it historically, but my hunch is that this was a system. And this system I usually refer to as a system of divine kings. And divine kingship, to my mind, was a system that predated human kingship. So human kingship occurred in South Asia, especially in India, uh, in different periods, in different places. But what was the prevalent system before the human kings took over? So probably this prevalent system before human kings took over was a system of divine kingship, where a particular deity was uh, accepted by the entire community as a divine king. And then the divine kings were idols, they were placed inside temples, and then they had their own officialdom and they toured their territory constantly. So this is what I'm going to talk about. This is what I'm uh, going to refer to as divine kingship. So you will hear the term divine kings quite often when I'm speaking. And I hope I've been able to explain what I refer to when I talk about divine kings. And Mahasu is one such divine king. So once I describe Mahasu, I guess there will be even more clarity. So Mahasu is actually, it's a kingship once again, but it's a complex of four brother gods. So this is not just one particular deity, but these are four deities. And all four deities are brothers, and they form a very interesting constellation. They form a very interesting mandala kind of arrangement in the entire region. Interestingly, before the British decided to have Shimla as the summer capital of India, the entire district that consisted of Shimla and surrounding areas was known as the district of Mahasu. And Mahasu was the dominant force. Mahasu was the dominant uh, Devta who ruled over that region. And of course, the Mahasu cult is also spread out through Uttarakhand. So it's not just Himachal, but the Mahasu cult also spreads through Uttarakhand, um, which is in a region which is part of the Dehradun district and is called Jaunsar Babar. So Jaunsar Babar and parts of Himachal Pradesh were the areas where these four Mahasu brothers ruled. And the constellation itself was very interesting because one of the brothers was called Botha Mahasu. He was a sitting Mahasu. Botha refers to sitting, and this particular Mahasu sat in one place, at a place called Hanol, uh, and uh, and became the pivot, became the axis mundi of the entire kingdom, and was located on the banks of the river Tons in Jaunsar Babar, in a place which is about 300 kilometers from Dehradun and is called Hanol. And then there were two minor deities, two other brothers. One was the Bashik Mahasu, who was supposed to be the eldest of the four Mahasus, and then a Pabasik Mahasu. So the Bashik Mahasu would process, he would uh, go around in a particular territory on the left bank of the Tons, whereas Pabasik would process, he would go around in his procession on the right bank of the Tons River. So the Tons River was a kind of a dividing line between these two deities. And then the fourth and the youngest and the most powerful of the four Mahasu siblings was the Chalda Mahasu. Chalda referring to walking, and Chalda Mahasu would take a huge circle and go around the entire territory. So there were four brother gods who ruled over this region. Now, why I say ruled over this region is because the four brother gods together, they formed a kind of a group of deities that controlled the region, not just in terms of ritual, not just in terms of religion, but also very much in terms of politics. So we will get into that a little later. But uh, so what I was basically studying in this region was I was looking at the folklore, I was talking to a lot of people, I was looking at a lot of the temples, and of course I was walking with the processions of the Mahasus, trying to figure out what these processions actually meant to the people. And this I did for quite a few years, and then I realized that the region that I was working in was much bigger and included a lot of the parts of Himachal Pradesh as well. And I also realized that a lot of the rituals, a lot of the things that these people did were actually a mix of um, several ritualistic communities. Like for instance, you could find a lot of the rituals from borrowed from the Naga cults. A lot of the rituals pertained to Shiva. A lot of the rituals, to my mind, appeared to be straight out of Bon Buddhism. A lot of the rituals also looked at ancestor worship. So it was a strange mix of, and I think cultures work in that way because cultures don't, um, they don't, uh, demolish something completely and establish something entirely new. But cultures assimilate ideas from different periods, and what every community or every culture creates is something which is very unique and very distinct to that particular community. And that is what I saw with the Mahasu realm too, because in the Mahasu realm, these four brother gods, uh, they were ruling over these kingdoms as divine kings. And the method of rule was, uh, if I were to put it very simply, there were two processes, the processes of possession and the process of procession. So possession and procession. Possession, when I say possession, it means that the oracle of the divine king, oracle of Mahasu, would get possessed and he would speak as the voice of Mahasu. So here the entire concept of kingship has been, in a way, it has been inverted in a counterintuitive way, because normally when we think about a king, we say, oh, he has a divine connection and the God speaks through him. But here we have a God who has a human who is, uh, who is through whom the God will speak. So the voice of the God comes to us through a human. He is the oracle. If we say it in common English language, it's oracle, but locally when we talk about these people who you can find sitting in various temples all over Himachal Pradesh, not just in Mahasu temples, but several other temples in Himachal and of course Uttarakhand. They are sometimes they are called Malis, sometimes they are called Pashwas, sometimes they are called the Gur. So there are different nomenclatures in different parts of the Himalayas, but they are essentially the voice of the divine. And how do they become a voice of the divine? They become a voice of the divine through the possession that they work up. And these possessions, they um, help the community to hear what the God is trying to tell them. Now, when I looked at Mahasu, I realized that in the upper reaches, now, if you look at the Western Himalaya, a lot of the cultures in the Western Himalaya are agro-pastoralist cultures. A lot of the people practice sheep rearing, they practice grazing of livestock as a primary occupation. And because they do this periodically throughout the year, for some part of the year, they have to be up there in the pasture lands, in the bugyals, with the livestock. And the other part of the family stays in the village. So there was a marked difference between what Mahasu was and what the pastoralist gods were. And the marked difference comes through the origin myth. Like if you look at most pastoralist gods, the original myth is that of a particular uh, sheep or goat attaching itself to a stone. And then the shepherds go and they try to remove this particular goat or sheep from the rock, and they are not able to detach the animal from the rock, and then they start digging, and then they realize that there is an idol under the rock, and so the idol is discovered, and then it is venerated, it is worshipped. And most of the times, who are the people who are worshipping? uh, the people who are worshipping are the shepherds themselves. But here is Mahasu, who is very particular about his temples, who ensures that the temples have priests, the priests are appointed, and they also have rituals. And then, of course, you have tax that people bring to the temple. They still bring to the temple a lot of the agricultural produce, um, which is called koot. And the koot is given to the temple so that the temple runs a continuous kitchen for visitors. And of course, the pastoralist ideas are also incorporated because a lot of people come and offer their animals for sacrifice. And then the Devta also decides to go out in procession. So the Devtas are processing too. Other than probably Bodha Mahasu, a lot of the Devtas in the Himalayas you would see are always in procession. So if you visit the Himalayas and if you care to walk from one place to another, very often you will come across these palanquins which people are carrying on their shoulders, and the palanquins are traveling from one village to another village. So Mahasu also has these palanquins. The three Mahasu brothers, they have elaborate palanquins, and the palanquins are constantly traveling. They're constantly processing. That's why I named my book "Till Kingdom Come." A lot of the people, asked me if it's a biblical reference. Why are you using this name? But I found this idea very intriguing. That it's a deity, it's a divine king, and the kingdom can actually travel. It can go in a procession uh, to a particular village, to a particular person who is seeking justice from the divine king. So it is normally you approach a court of justice. Normally you come to a king asking for your welfare, but here it works the other way around also, because you can always, if there is discord within the village, if there are problems within the area that you're living in, you can actually go and invite the devata, and the devata will come to your village in a grand procession. So that idea really appealed to me, and I worked a lot on that. uh, so uh, so the Mahasu is the cult of Mahasu, to my mind, is a kind of transition between a completely pastoralist culture, which allowed uh, polyandry or polygynandry, which is essentially the practice of which is essentially the practice of uh,
Sorry to intervene, but I think somebody shared their screen by mistake. Sorry about that.
No, it's okay. So yeah, so I was talking about the divine kings, and why I would call them kings. So if you look at Kautilya's definition of what a kingdom has to be, the definition that he uses in his Arthashastra. So he describes every kingdom in India to have these 7 limbs, and the 7 limbs refer to a king, to a country or a territory, a minister, an army, a fort, a treasure, and an ally. So when I look at Mahasu's processions, and when I look at the Mahasu regime, the realm, I realized that the king, of course, is Mahasu, but instead of one, now there are 4 brother kings. They all have territories. They have very clearly marked out territories. As I mentioned, Bodhai is sitting at one place, Pabasik on the right bank of the Tons, Basik on the left bank of the Tons, and Chalda Mahasu going around the territory, spending 12 years on one side of the Tons River, and then crossing over and spending the next 12 traveling from one village to another village on the other side of the river. So these kings are constantly invited to different regions. Uh, Wherever people are facing problems, they are facing problems like epidemics. Sometimes there is a lack of rain. Sometimes there is discord within the village. People don't agree on certain things. Sometimes there has been injustice and someone wants um, justice from the Devta. And so the Devta travels to you and dispenses justice. So if you look at Kautilya's definition, all the 7 boxes get ticked. And therefore, I say that the Mahasus, like many other Devi Devatas in the Western Himalaya, are themselves Rajas or kings or political figures. Now, uh, a historian and sociologist called Clifford Geertz has written about South Asian kingship, and he has uh, divided kingship into 3 brackets. He has talked about kingship in Europe, looking at the British monarchy, and he has said that the main attribute in the British monarchy is the attribute of virtue, that the queen or the king has to be virtuous, uh, and that's the most significant attribute of the ruler. In the same way, he has looked at the Middle East, and he has looked at Moroccan kings and talked about Moroccan kings, saying that their most significant attribute is mobility, that the king has to be moving constantly, like the Mughals, who spent like 70% of their lifetime. The early Mughals spent 70 or 80% of their life on horseback and in tents, fighting enemies. So to him, in the Middle East, the Raja has to be constantly mobile, and his mobility, his ability to go from one place to another, is his most significant attribute. Whereas in the case of Indic kingdoms, especially kingdoms in India and South Asia, uh, Geertz has mentioned the most significant attribute being the attribute of being the axis, being the center point, the axis mundi of the kingdom. Now, if you look at Mahasu and if you look at most other deities in the Western Himalaya, you will realize that all 3 attributes are present in these divine kings. And that's how I uh, reach this particular term called divine kings, because these are divine kings. They are virtuous by their conduct. They are constantly moving as well. So in India, we see a lot of this in temples in other parts of the country also. Like for instance, in the Jagannath temple at Puri, where the presiding deity has to come out in procession once a year. So that could be once a year, but here there is a elaborate calendar, and the devtas are constantly on the move. They even travel to places like Haridwar. They travel to Kedarnath to the palanquin needs to get purified, it needs to get charged up in some way or the other. And then, of course, they come back to their own temples, which are incidentally referred to as courts or fortresses and not as temples. And then, whenever they get invited to other villages, they travel to the other villages. Of course, the traveling is very tough because you are traveling up in the mountains. Sometimes you're even walking through snow and you're carrying this heavy load of the palanquin over your shoulder. But we will remember that the main ways in which the entire kingdom functions are the rituals of possession and procession. And in my book, I have criticized a little bit about uh, something that Clifford Geertz has said, that he has given these three attributes to three different regions and three different types of monarchs. But in Himachal Pradesh and in Uttarakhand, I have found that all these three attributes are found within one particular deity, one particular Devi or Devata. And so the whole kingdom is also organized in the form of a mandala. And you have the central point, like in Mahasu's case, the center, the axis, the pivot is the Kotha Mahasu temple at Hanul. And then you have all the other kindred jatis, you have all the other people organized around that axis. And of course, Chalda Mahasu traveling all around. Now, and when you talk to people, when you um, when you look at people's lifestyles and when you see how people conduct their daily lives, you realize that uh, the the main purpose of the life is to make sure that the Dev Karya is performed. So people would drop everything, whatever work they're doing, they would drop it if the Devata is coming to their area. If there is a festival, even when they're working in towns and cities, they would come back to the temples. And for them, the most significant aspect of being from these regions or being a subject of the Devata is to fulfill Devta Rajaga Kam. So the Devta Rajaga Kam has to be, it gets a lot of significance. And because of that, I think the Devatas still remain very, very significant in the lives of people. And it's a unique cosmology. It's a very unique way of looking at the world. And let me go a little briefly into this, because a lot of people first look at rituals as with a lot of suspicion. So ritual is a term of suspicion in the Western world, or the world which has been influenced by a Western education. Uh, so we say that we live in a secular world, and we are not superstitious, and we don't believe in ritual. So first of all, we discount ritual as meaningless, repetitive activity that has very little significance in the modern world. Now, I differ on this point, because ritual, even when you look at modern politics, even when you look at what people do today in the name of politics, it is highly ritualized. It is highly, it sometimes, of course, it goes beyond reason. It goes beyond all rational thinking. Uh, but when you look at the Mahasu divine kings, there is a certain pattern. There is a certain logic behind what the deities are doing. And when you go back into history, you even realize how this system has helped communities survive and help communities thrive in all the adversity, uh, in all the adverse climatic conditions, in all the adverse, uh, the toughest regions of the world that these people live in. So to my mind, this ritual is quite significant. And even today, when we say that we are rationalists and we don't believe in superstition, we are also very much entrenched in ritual. So a lot of the sociologists and anthropologists had postulated at a time, at an earlier time, that if modernity were to come and people were to get educated, the people were to get benefits of science, there would be roads, there would be education, there would be factories where people would work, and then they would forget these loyalties to devtas. They would forget something called caste. So, as the term that they often used was primordial loyalties. Now, over a period of time, we have all realized that these primordial loyalties are not going away anywhere. The more modern we become, the more science we learn, the more technology we adopt, we also kind of, uh, uh, the more religion takes a hold over society, the more caste takes a hold over society. So all this liberalization and scientific education has changed certain things, but it has not been able to um, alter ways of life uh, very, very significantly. So, so does that mean that the people who follow the devatas or who walk in the devata processions or who constantly engage with what I describe as Dev Karya or Devta Raja Rakam, that they would drop everything and go and become a part of the devata's procession or his welcoming party, um, and who would also allow the devata to participate in the political system of the village. Uh, are they deficiently modern? Are they not modern enough? Or so my reaction to that would be that all these people, they are getting modernized in their own way. So there is no single route, there is no single path to modernity, but every community, every group, every social group of people, they are finding their own path towards modernity, and therefore uh, there is a differentiated logic between how people in the US would become modern and how people in the Western Himalaya would become modern and how people in Delhi would become modern. Of course, we are all moving towards a different world, but a lot of the older loyalties are still very, very strong and indeed are getting stronger. Uh, so, when today I look at Mahasudevata and I look at what is happening in the cult, I find that the cult is very much entrenched in politics. Like, for instance, if you have to choose candidates for panchayat elections, if you have to choose candidates for the MLA elections, people still go to the temple and consult the Mahasu oracle. So the Mahasu oracle or the Devta himself has a say in the selection of candidates. It would be very difficult for someone to contest an election and without the support of the Devta. Similarly, the Devata is still treated as a god of justice. A lot of people prefer to go to the deity and not go to the civil courts in case of a dispute. Um, there was this one incident where I accompanied a priest of Mahasudevata who gave me a call one day, and he said that the chief minister has invited me to his house. Since you are doing this research, would you like to come? And I was a little scared of going with him because I thought they would find out about me, and they would say that who is this guy trying to document what is happening inside the chief minister's house. But then I decided to go in with him, and I realized that it was quite easy for the Mahasu priests to get, to enter the chief minister's inner chambers. And he had been invited to perform a special puja for the chief minister because the chief minister wanted a grandson. And so the entire family sat down, and when they realized that I was a researcher, there was a little bit of, glancing at each other, but then they said, okay, you don't use the camera, but still you can sit. So, and observe. And towards the end of the puja, so the chief minister made his request to the devata when the oracle was adequately possessed. And he said that I want a grandson. And Mahasu Devta quickly responded by asking, okay, what do I get in return? You are a king, I'm a king. So if you ask me something, I could also ask you something. And the chief minister said, yes, you would get whatever you asked for. And then he said that, okay, you declare my temple as the Panchwa Dham, my temple at Hanod. So Uttarakhand has these char dhams. We all know about the char dhams, the Kedarnath, Badrinath, Gangotri, and Yamunotri. Uh, and he wanted the Panchwa Dham. And lo and behold, the chief minister agreed. And he also made an announcement to the effect. But of course, with politics, a lot of things change very quickly. So the Panchwa Dham actually did not materialize for quite some time. Then the chief minister lost his position. So we see in these ways, there is the devatas, they still infiltrate into the political system of today. And even when you go back to the colonial times, as I mentioned in the beginning, that the British came into this region after the Anglo-Gurkha War. And one of the earlier administrators of the region was Major Young, who had fought against the Gurkhas and who was then later on made the resident at Dehradun. And as the resident of Dehradun, he was making several land settlements um, between the Raja of Tigri and between the British themselves and between the other kingly states. Now, for the British, they were coming from a different culture. They were coming from a different cultural background. And it was difficult for them to understand that an idol kept in total secrecy, traveling in palanquins from one part of the region to another part of the region. How can this palanquin be a ruler? How can he be a king? So wherever there were human kings, the British followed a policy of restoring the human kings. They said, okay, we can't rule over this Himalayan wilderness as long as we get our revenues. We are not interested as long as we get the Bethus, about whom Aniket ji has written a lot. So as long as we get the porters to do the work for us, uh, we don't need to rule over these kingdoms directly. Let the earlier kings retain their kingdoms as long as they keep giving us the revenue and as long as they keep giving us the bigar, or the free labor, or the unfree labor. So in the case of Mahasu, they were quite confounded about how to deal with this phenomenon, who was not a human, but who still claimed taxes, who still claimed ownership of lands, who still claimed to be the person who delivers justice, who still claims to be an entity that could control the weather in several cases. So they were confounded by this whole idea, and therefore they decided to settle a lot of the land disputes within their own courts. Now, in one particular land dispute over the Ramai Valley, which fell between the Mahasu kingdom and the kingdom of Tiri. Major Young took about 4 years to listen to all the parties. He called in all the chiefs. He called the lawyers of the Raja of Tiri in his court, tried to settle the land dispute, but couldn't do it for 4 years. And then finally he agreed. Finally, he decided that since no one would accept his judgment, he would have to go to the court of Mahasu. So he said that, okay, all the parties will now come to the court of Mahasu. I will also go to the temple at Hanol, and that's where we will sit by the towns. And all of you, you swear the oaths as is done in the Mahasu temples. And whoever is swearing the false oath will have to face Mahasu's wrath. He will have to face the anger of the divine king. And lo and behold, some of the parties, they just refused to swear the oath out of fear from the Devta. And this was a very interesting incident, because to my mind, this was the first interface between the divine king, who was a non-human agent, and a foreign power coming in. And to realize from Major Young's diaries, which I have the good fortune of finding in the British Library, that that the British administrator had himself traveled to the Devta's shrine and sought his justice, sought his ways of delivering justice. So this was in 1826. Very early times. But then there was another colonial officer called Emerson, who has written an anthropological account of the Mahasu kingdom much later, almost a century later, in 1911. And his records a number of supernatural experiences with Mahasu, because now people have become more rationalist. People have become people like Emerson do not accept Mahasu as someone who needs to be given any political weightage. So he completely refuses to oblige the Devta or the requests that people make on the Devta's behalf. And a lot of the times, through his refusal, a lot of incidents happen which also leave him a bit confused about what's happening here. So Emerson's accounts are also very interesting. Like, for instance, in one particular account, he says that uh, some people came to me asking for a grant for the temple, which I refused, for Mahasu's temple. And then when we were traveling in the very close to that temple, my little child, who was in another horse, fell off the horse into the ditch. But of course, the little boy fell on soft ground. He fell on soft sand. It was unhurt completely. But then Emerson, being the colonial officer, he hauled up the caretaker of the little child. And the caretaker very clearly told him, so this is Mahasu's signal. This is not something else, but this is a signal from the divine king that you refuse the grant. And as the child was very calm, and there was uh, there was nothing amiss, and then all of a sudden the child falls into the ditch, and that sets Emerson thinking, I believe, because he writes about all these incidents in his own accounts. So I'm already getting some questions. Should I be answering questions now, or should I take the questions later?
We can take the questions later. We do it at the very end so that there is a flow of information, like from your side. But yes, we do have a request. If you could, whenever you're comfortable, if you could show us some photographs of the Mahasu temple, that would be wonderful. It'll give us some context in terms of visually how it is.
Okay, so I did, though I have a presentation, but I'll just maybe show them to you through the book, which is, so this is the spire of the Mahasu Devata Temple. And of course, this is the book that I've written. Um, so very quickly, I'll show you some pictures of the temple. So when I'm talking about the region, I'm talking about Western Himalayas. This is towards the north of the Dehradun district in a region called Jaunsar Babar, which is considered to be a tribal area, designated as tribal. And it's a very interesting story of how the region was also. Uh, so this is how a Mahasu procession looks. If you can see on the screen, there is the Mahasu oracle who has the palanquin of Chalda Mahasu on his shoulders, and he's throwing the rice at all the subjects. And right next to him in the cap is the minister of Mahasu, and so the entire procession, it travels in state, and so we have to look for the.
Can we see your presentation?
Yeah, this is the temple of Mahasu at Hanol. So this is one of the temples, if you can see it on the screen. The presentation will, I'm afraid it'll take a little more time, and I don't know whether this will permit.
You can take as much time as you want. We are here. We are a very eager audience.
Okay, so if you have the patience, maybe I'll try and.
Yeah, the presentation will give a very good view of the.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
I'll just try to do a screen share if that's possible. So if you just give me. So can you see this on the screen?
Yes, we can.
So this is a palanquin. This is basically a palanquin and a bearer of another palanquin. This is actually two devatas meeting somewhere close to Gangotri. And you can see how they greet each other. So when we look at Western Himalaya, we look at these traditions, we look at communities. This is how they come together at the temples, and this is one of the dances that they perform. So I leave out the theoretical bit because then it'll get too long. This is another picture of the Mahasu procession. You can see the so you can identify people from different communities by the caps. So you can see some of the people are wearing blue baseball caps. They belong to the host village. And then you can see musicians, drummers, especially the drummers are very significant to the entire cult because they are the tradition bearers. They know all the rituals. And then you can see the people in the green caps. You can easily tell them that they are from a different village, and they are also part of the procession. And the silver box that you see, which is being carried with a chhatra, with a kind of a parasol, golden parasol on top, is the parasol of Mahasu, which is on top of the palanquin. So the Devata in itself is a little idol made out of silver, which is wrapped in red cloth, placed inside this box when the Devata is traveling. And in the front of the procession usually are the oracles, the people who get possessed. And so this picture tells us that the region has whatever, a lot of people have written about this region actually, but they have mainly focused on this whole idea of Pandav Vivaha or polyandry, where one woman can have 5 husbands, like the Pandavas did. But of course, things are very different now. I did not see much evidence of polyandry in the region in all the years that I've worked in this region. Um, I leave out this bit. Uh, and yeah, so this is the Mahasu Devta temple. And these are the two people that I was talking about. Major Young, who's there in the gray hair in a portrait that was made after retirement. And so he and Sudarshan, Raja Sudarshan Shah, who was the Raja of Teri, who was also shown in the picture. So they came to this temple at Hanol, and Major Young was seeking Mahasu's justice because his own system of justice would not work in this particular land settlement case. And then a century after him, almost 100 years after Young, uh, Emerson, whose picture is at the bottom, was the governor of the Shimla Hill States, and he was also traveling in that area, and a lot of people made requests to him about grants to Mahasu temple. So there is this one Mahasu temple, which is the Hanol Mahasu temple, but as I said, there are 4 siblings, and in a lot of village clusters, they have their own temples, and they keep traveling from one region to another. So wherever Emerson went, he would get requests and he would turn them down. But then he would have certain experiences which left him wondering about what was actually happening in the region and why at all was he having these experiences. He also realized that the Devata has considerable political clout. He can claim lands, he can collect taxes, um, much more political clout than the British could ever exert in the region. So, this brings me to the whole idea of modernity, like what is happening. So people will carry guns, but they will also use mobile phones. So they will be the Khuns, they will be the warriors of Mahasu, but they will also be citizens of modern India voting in the election. So they will still accept the government, they will still accept grants, they will still accept, um, you know, this tribal status which the Jaunsaris have got from the government. But they would still remain very fiercely loyal to their divine kings and follow a completely different political system. And in a way, the kingship in the regions has, it has not disappeared in any way, because today those same kings have entered the electoral fray. Like for instance, on the left, you see the Tiri Maharani, who is our member of parliament from the Dehradun constituency. And so in a lot of times, we have seen that they still behave like royals, and they still, you know, uh, they still invoke the devatas, they still invoke the deities in order to, uh, in order to retain their hold over their subjects, over their electorate even. Like for instance, on the picture on the right is that of Veerbhadra Singh, and his son has also entered politics now. So Raja Veerbhadra Singh was the Raja of Rampur Bashar. He was a important ally of the Mahasu um, mm, Mahasu system, and he's one of the more regular visitors to the Mahasu temple even today. And a lot of his support base when he contests elections in Rampur, Bashar, Rodu regions comes from the Mahasu followers. So, of course, I will not talk too much on the theoretical part. So, yes, there are these, you know, when we look at these communities, a lot of times we create these dichotomies between nature and culture. We create a difference between uh, that this is nature and this is culture. Like even when we talk about secular ideas, we think about secularism as something which is now a part of us. Um, but we are still confused about whether we are looking at the Western idea of secularism, which is an idea of separating religion from politics. Uh, but in India, it doesn't work that way. Even when we say that we are secular or we are a secular constitution, uh, we are we are talking in terms of tolerance. That my secularism is based on uh, the religion that I follow, but it is also based on an understanding of the other religious denomination. And whenever we are talking about secularism, a lot of times we forget about these communities. We forget that in these communities, nature and culture are very, very closely um, intertwined with each other. And so when I look at Uttarakhand, Uttarakhand became a state on the basis of these narratives that that nature and culture are one, and we need to preserve our nature. We need to preserve our ecology, our environment, and therefore the entire uh, movement for a different state started with the Chipko movement and with the anti-dam movement, uh, the movement to preserve our forests. Um, but today, what do we see? Today, we see a very different picture because we see that uh, most of the political masters have forgotten the idea that nature and culture are so closely connected in the Himalayas, and they cannot be separated. And because they cannot see this connect between nature and culture, we have huge problems like the problems of out migration, something that we describe generally as palayan, that people are uh, don't feel happy enough in their villages, and so they have to migrate to the cities in search for better job prospects. So if you look at the Uttarakhand of today, there is this whole debate that in Uttarakhand we have the sources for the hydropower, and electricity is quite expensive in Uttarakhand. But people look at Delhi and they say, oh, Delhi is getting free electricity. They're getting the electricity out of free out of the dams that are built on our rivers, and and that makes people very, very suspicious of what's happening with modernity today. So this presentation was actually made in a different context. It was made in the context of what is happening in Uttarakhand today. But I think it's quite relevant because in Uttarakhand we see these huge deluges like we had in 2013, the Kedarnath tragedy, and then we have these huge road projects going up to the Char Dham, which will make pilgrimage easier, which will make these regions very accessible to city dwellers, but not bring too much for the community. So, we're trying, well, we are getting audio from somewhere. Yeah. So this is basically what I wanted to say, that the secular world that we live in is also very much connected with institutions like the institution of Mahasu, and and we cannot separate the two worlds. We cannot separate that people living in Delhi are living in a separate world, and this is a completely separate world which is disconnected uh, from what's happening in the mainstream. So people are very much connected, but they're also very much rooted in the systems. So we have to re-examine these notions of vikas. We have to re-examine these notions of development, uh, that how development is actually benefiting these communities, whether there is actually a need for these people to start thinking of the devatas or the Devi Devta system as some kind of superstition or black magic and adopt the urban systems. So these are questions which are very much open and which are very hotly debated, because modern democracy is interfering a lot in how the communities live. There is, like for instance, there is a ban uh, on animal sacrifice in the temples. Now, the logic in the Himalayas is that most people are pastoralists. They live by grazing livestock. And what would they offer to the devta? They would offer something which is dearest to them, like like a goat or or sheep. And here we have a notice from the district magistrate saying that this is not allowed anymore, one fine day. Similarly, the whole idea of tribalizing a group within the Mahasu cult. So the Jaunsaris are now a designated tribe. And then people around them who follow similar culture are always questioning this idea that why just the Jaunsaris? Why not us? We should also get the benefit of being um, worshippers of Mahasu and being subjects of Mahasu. So these are a lot of these questions, they still remain, and they need to be looked into in greater detail. Thank you very much. I have taken almost an hour.
Not at all.
And so I
And
hope you found it interesting enough, and now we can take some questions. Yes, ma'am.
okay, and of course, at this point, everybody can have their videos up, and I will start taking the questions in order of their the hands that are raised. But I can take the liberty of asking the first question.
Yeah.
So, thank you for that wonderful lecture, especially because when you're talking about the Western Himalayas, and I'm here in Kullu Valley, there's so many similarities and differences
Yes, yes,
that
yes.
kind of I was noticing while you were talking. So the one question that I have: how does the presence of the Mahasu cult? You did talk about the chief minister, so that's the political figure. But when it comes to the royal families, the erstwhile kings of Kumaon, when India was not independent, how did the cult of Mahasu and how was it juxtaposed with the ruling house? Because here you have the god who has his own retinue of officials. So how did they relate to each other?
Yeah. So when I was mentioning the seven limbs of a kingdom, I also mentioned the allies as one of the limbs. And so the kingdom of Mahasu was kind of sandwiched between the kingdom of Tihri and the kingdom of Jubbal and the kingdom of Sirmaur. And of course, a lot of the smaller principalities like Dhadi and Keonjhar. And so most of these rajas who were human kings, they also had, alliances with Mahasu. So they had relationships of gift giving. They would give lands, they would give produce from land, they would give livestock to the temple, and the devta in turn would also visit them, visit these kingdoms and legitimize these kingdoms. Uh, and therefore there was this very convenient relationship with the neighboring kings. Of course, Mahasu was also very expansionist in his. So the territories were clearly marked, but the whole concept of territory was also very different from the way we look at territory today. So when we think in terms of territory, we think in terms of maps. Like for instance, in the India-China conflict, there is this whole idea of LAC moving this way and that way. But in the case of the Devatas, there were no maps at that point in time. But the territory was a territory wherever the Devata was welcomed, wherever he would get hospitality, wherever he would get gifts. but he would come and go away. So the entire idea of traveling also legitimized, like for instance, if the Devata was to travel to the kingdom of Dhadi, where a human king was already ruling. So in the Dhadi palace, there was a room kept separately. Even today, there is a room on the top floor which is kept for Mahasu. So the Mahasu palanquin can come and rest there. And when the Devata goes away, the procession goes away. So he legitimizes the ruler of Dhadi, and in a way, the ruler of Dhadi also builds an alliance with Mahasu. So there was no ambiguity. It was quite clear that
And
all these rajas were allies.
And I think one of the photographs that you showed where, you know, the green capped individuals, and then
Yeah,
you showed Veerbhadra Singh. So, of course, the Kinnauri caps, and then you mentioned the
yeah,
alliance of the Kinnauri people and that association. And the region, you know, Rampur and all that area, Jubbal and all, is known as Mahasu, right?
yes,
So
yes,
that's
yes.
the alliance, right?
Hmm. Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Okay, and the other question before I take all the other raised hands, which Mahasu is the oracle channeling? So is it Bhota or the Chalra or the other two that you mentioned? And how do we know which Mahasu it is? Which brother is it?
So the oracle is either sitting in the temple, like for the Botha Mahasu, or the oracle would be sitting in the temple at Hanoi. And for the Chalda Mahasu, because he's always traveling, the oracle would be traveling. So for 12 years, Chalda will have an oracle, the main oracle will be traveling with Chalda on one side of the river. And then when so this system is also very interesting because it comes from the Mahabharata trope of the Pandavas and the Kauravas. So communities usually divide themselves into Shati and Pashi. So Shati, because in the hills, people believe that there were 60 Kauravas and not 100. So the the lower bank of the river is always the Shati. The higher bank is always the Pashi, the Pandavas. So the Pashi will have their own oracle for the particular deity, and the Shati will have their own oracle. So the roles would change, the oracles would start traveling automatically the moment the Devata crosses the river. So you go to the temples of different deities, and you know that the oracles of those deities will be found in the temple or with the procession.
Okay, okay, that's so fascinating. Thank you. So I'll take Aniket Alam's question. He has his hand raised. So I'll
Yes, sir.
unmute you.
Hi, thank you so much for this really fascinating talk. We got this book of yours for our library, and the lockdown just started. So I have finally earlier this week, managed to get my hands physically on the copy, and coincidentally, I started reading it just as the notice of your talk came. So it's, I suppose, really nice because it gives me an overview for reading the book. In fact, I'm quite fascinated by this. You're talking about the movement and all that. Uh, these are also territories of other gods. And what you talked about, this ritual kingship and divine kingship that they have, I just want to know from you, because you have looked at it so much more closely than I have, is how do these relationships over time change? Say, Mahasu's relation with Shirgul, or Mahasu's relation with Chasralu, or Mahasu's relations with the other major deities in the Tons Power region.
Hmm.
Do you see a change over the 20th century, and especially in the 21st century? Or do you think there are certain things which are, in a sense, encrusted in ritual? So the change, in a sense, if not, is not there, but is very slow. That's my question.
Yeah, so it's quite a expansive question, but thank you so much for reading through the book, Aniketji. And in fact, I've quoted your book a lot in the book. I read through your book, Becoming India, where you had talked about this, the Bethus and the Begari system, and how the British and the Devtas dealt with it. Um, so thank you for reading the book. And yes, as I was mentioning, the whole idea of modernity, the whole sense of roads coming into that area. So there's lots of tourism, there's lots of, so the entire region in the upper above Jaunsar, like the Rupin Valley, Supin Valley, we have a national park called the Govind Pashu Vihar. And then we have the treks, very popular treks like Kedar Kantha or the Harki Doon treks. So bringing in a lot of tourism, bringing in a lot of urban visitors to this entire region. And of course, with it, the roads. Now, as I said, the palanquin travels. It has to travel. The whole, the kingdom is defined. The territory is defined through processions. And so wherever the Devata will be welcomed, whichever community will welcome the Devata, offer hospitality to the Devata, build a temple in his honor, the Devata will consider that region as his own, part of his own territory. Now, a lot of times what is happening is that people have lost the ability to walk in the procession. And wherever they find a road, a lot of the times the people will prefer to not walk on the ridges, but they would like hire a jeep and move through the bazaar where the roads exist. Now, when this happens, the Devata is intruding into another Devata's territory. Like for instance, the Mahasu has sometimes intruded into Raja Karn's territory, who is ruling from the temple in Deoda, or into the Someshu's territory. So whenever these things happen, there are lots of controversies. There is a lot of debate, uh, and also the communities will come together. As you are aware, sir, there was in the earlier times in these regions there was a significant tradition of raiding each other. That the communities, if these codes were violated, if one community violated the code of another community, they would raid the other community. They would practice head hunting as well. So of course these things cannot happen in the present day because the administration is present and the governments are there. But a lot of the times these things, they come to a head, and then there is a lot of argument, there is a lot of debate, and but generally I have found that with all that debate and argument, they reach some kind of a solution. They reach some kind of via media, a middle path. So yes, the relationships are changing. There is a huge change uh, because there are some of the regions where the Devatas would not allow tourism. Like we've all heard of the Manali ski resort, which Henry Ford wanted to set up, and the Devatas kind of refused, did not allow him to set it up. So there is a huge conflict. There are huge changes that are happening. Um, and But in most of the cases, what I find is that the government and its bureaucracy is very insensitive to these ideas because they have not been able to shake off the colonial mindset, and they don't understand the ritual, they don't understand the tradition in the regions, and which kind of is making the whole, I mean, is raises the levels of conflict. So I think I would leave it there, because if I start talking in detail, then things will get more quite controversial as well. um,
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Aniket.
And
I hope
adding
I've
to,
answered. Yes, ma'am.
go ahead. You were saying something. I'll talk
No,
after you.
I was just saying that I hope I've answered Aniket ji's question to his satisfaction.
No, no. In fact, we need to talk and discuss much more. I mean, it's really good that we have. I heard you. In fact, there is a follow-on question, but I don't want you to answer it now because there are other people waiting. But Mark Elmore's book about becoming secular in the religious stage, and he looks at the same region and he's looking at similar processes. So I think it's really fascinating to get your work to speak to Mark Elmore and look at what is emerging from that. But I'll leave that to another discussion. I mean, let's not intrude into this. Thank you so
I
much.
will definitely go through it. I'll definitely go through it. Thank you. Thank you so much.
And you were talking about the conflict with authorities. I have to tell you that here in the Kulu Valley, there is this very fiery devta. His name is Nag Bhumal. And during the Dussehra festival, I think about a year or so ago, he actually went. Um, he walked after the Dussehra back to his villages, which is about 2.5 hours. And after about 1.5 hours of walking, he suddenly turned, his palanquin turned, went back, and he went straight to the SP's office, the superintendent of police, and the district collector, asked him to come out. And of course, the palanquin was and he's a showstopper, traffic stopper here. And the YouTube videos on him, he's such a fast god. So this whole thing about, channeling through the gore, and he took them to the ground and said, look who's occupying my space. Tell them to get off. The Dussehra is not done as yet. I have left, but what is this nonsense going on? So he went to the right authorities. So this is a little bit of humor in the devtas of the Kulu Valley.
Lots of such instances, very interesting instances, because they show that the people's allegiance is still towards the devata, and they can have very, very deep political effects on communities, and for which the modern governments need to recognize the institution.
We have Simi with her hand raised. So Simi, you could take on the mic.
Hello, first of all, it was a very nice talk.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I have two questions. My first question is, as maybe in a field you may have come across the process of the possession by an oracle. So
Yes.
do you believe in that possession or rituals the indigenous people have for their deities?
Okay. Tough question. Second one.
Okay.
You said you have two questions.
My second question is, when we are in a field, we have some critical opinion about for example, animal sacrifice. So how to bring that into our writings? Will that be a biasness to write our critical opinion?
Well, to the second question, the simple answer is that your opinion comes secondary. It comes later on. But first, you have to look at what the people think, what the people say about. Of course, there are certain people who are criticizing the ritual. They're criticizing animal sacrifice. I've also written a chapter about animal sacrifice in my book. So there are some people who are critical of the whole thing, but most people support the idea of animal sacrifice. So as a researcher, my duty is to report what the people say without bringing my bias into the entire debate. But we can balance by bringing in both the opinions of the critics as well as the people who support the ritual. And we can just give the community's perspective. I think that's the most important thing, because every term that I use, every idea that I express in my book, I always measure it with this scale. That does the community think like this? Am I representing the community's opinion, or am I expressing my own opinion? So my own opinion doesn't count. As an anthropologist, my duty um, is to record what is actually happening in the field. That's my and the first question about about my belief in possessions. Again, it doesn't count. As a scientist, as a social scientist, as a person who's been brought up in the rationalist frame, I'm not supposed to believe in possession. And a lot of people who meet me when I'm on field and I'm looking at these rituals, they also come up to me and ask me the same question कि हमारे कल्चर में तो ये होता है, पर एज अ साइंटिस्ट आप मानते हो कि इससे कुछ होता है? That does it have any effect? Is it really is it only play acting, or does it have any significance? So to my answer to this is that the community has it has sustained the community over centuries. These rituals, like for instance, if I look at this, the state of mental health in these regions. Dehradun has, I think, about 2 mental health practitioners. We have a small mental health hospital which doesn't have a doctor, the government hospital. But what about the state of mental health in all these villages in the upper reaches of the Himalayas? There is no mental health practitioner there. People can't go to a psychiatrist. People can't go to a psychologist if they have mental health issues. So if possession helps them in some way, why not? Uh, if it helps them in overcoming these issues, um, uh, then I think it has efficacy. It has its own place in the society, because of which societies have stuck to it for all these centuries. So it has sustained them in some way. Uh, I may not get possessed, I may not experience it, but um, I'm only at liberty to express the community's viewpoint. So we have to measure whatever we report through these 2 categories of anthropology, emic and etic. So is it the emic view? Is it the view from the inside? Or is it the scientist's view from the outside? That we need to always keep asking ourselves this question when we write our research. And I think from the community's point of view, possession has a very significant uh, efficacy. It has a very significant role to play, and we should not discount it as researchers.
And Dr. Ori, I would like to add, and I'm so glad that you mentioned the ethic and the especially here, of course, India is free. The Constitution of India does not allow discrimination on caste, creed, class. But when we are in these areas, we see caste-based distinctions, and I like what Dr. Ori said to all those anthropologists, young anthropologists, budding anthropologists, that you need to be very careful, be objective, don't become a social activist. You're an anthropologist. So
Yes.
even if it upsets you, be objective, because like Dr. Ori said, it's the people's perspective. Your perspective becomes secondary. So I totally agree with what he said. Okay, do we have other questions? I don't have any hands raised. So if you have any other questions, can you please raise your
We
hand
have some questions on the chat. We have some questions on the
on the chat?
Yeah.
Okay. Would you like me to read the questions? I'll have to scroll up and take them in order.
I could read them myself.
Okay.
So we have. So Sushma Chopra ji is asking me, apart from mobility, which 2 attributes were mentioned? So the attribute I mentioned for the Victorian or the European form of kingship was virtue, that the kings need to be virtuous. And for the Middle East kingdoms, he used the term mobility. And for India, for the Indic kingdoms, Clifford Geertz used the expression that the king has to be the center of the universe. He has to be the axis. He may not be very active. May not be very mobile, but he has to be just there in the center of the universe, and the whole world revolves around him. So the other two attributes are virtue and being the axis. Oh, so you've already responded. I'm sorry, I didn't see that. Um, so are there any particular dates? Vibhaji is asking, are there particular dates or time of the year when the Devatas come visiting? So there is anticipation that they will visit, kind of calendrical. There is a rough itinerary. There is a rough itinerary that the Devata will visit this particular village and spend 2 days. So at some place, depending on the significance of the region, the Devata is supposed to spend time. Maybe at some place he would spend 3 months. At some place he would spend um, just one night. And then there is also a seasonal quality to it. Like for instance, in the winter, the Devata will seldom travel because most of the pathways are snowbound. Uh, uh, so in some of the path, so it's seasonal as well as it is also varies from region to region. But yes, there is a rough itinerary that the Devata would follow, but then nothing is certain because it's all left up to the oracle. So the oracle will take a decision and very quickly the oracle will announce that the Devata will move tomorrow and people will get ready and they will start moving with the procession. So Vibhaji is saying interesting primordial loyalties, like people want to hold on to certain essence of who they are. So multiple modernities. Yes, definitely multiple modernities and modernities within their own matrix of what they think is modern, not in what the Europeans would want them to be or what the anthropologists would want them to be. It is their own path to modernity that they are tracing. So that's interesting. The oath taking, the British administration were pretty clever that way. In Naga Hills, also for tricky disputes, they resorted to traditional oath taking methods. So even now, it is resorted to. Okay, I have two questions. Simi is okay. So she is. I think I'm.
Simi asked,
Yes,
and I
ma'am.
think in Nandini Bhattacharya, she has a question. She has her hand raised.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes. Yes, ma'am. I can hear you,
Yes,
Nandini ji.
actually, yeah. Actually, it was raining very heavily, so I'm sorry. It is a fascinating study. I couldn't hear everything because the sound of the rain was very heavy. But
Okay.
anyway, I'm intrigued on two accounts.
Yes, ma'am.
First is the British, when they encounter such communities, first in the first place they grab the land.
Yes.
So here in this instance, as
Mm-hmm.
it appears, they allowed these people to
Mm-hmm.
retain their land.
Yeah.
And my second question is question or observation. The second one is they impose their law, their
Mm-hmm.
administration of justice.
Mm-hmm.
Did it happen in the case of this community?
Okay. Thank you, Nandini ji, for listening, even in the bad weather. But yes, so in the Himalayas, the Western Himalayas, the terrain is quite tough. It's quite a difficult place to live in. It's quite a difficult place to settle in and quite a difficult place to rule over people. The general impression in the British administration was that these are very refractory people. They are always ready to fight. They are very hardened people. They're also very superstitious. They practice black magic. They have strange practices like polyandry. And in fact, for a long time, it was also believed that if people went into these regions, the upper reaches, the women in these regions would easily cast spells on people and convert them into frogs and keep them captive. So there were all these beliefs that were working in the minds of the British administrators too. And the general policy was that this is uh, this is a terrible terrain to rule over. The agricultural produce is almost negligible. So let the Rajas rule over the territories, let the communities have control over the land, and only let the Rajas collect the revenue for the British. So the land was not that prized. The only thing that the British were looking for when they entered into these territories were the trade routes to Tibet. So the trade routes to Tibet were important for them, and they forced the Rajas, as Aniket ji has also mentioned in his book, that they were forcing the Rajas to work the trade routes for them free. They, so the Rajas were supposed to provide the labor, and the Rajas were supposed to build these roads and keep them well maintained,
Right.
because they were not very much interested in the land, but they were interested in the trade from Tibet, especially the
Mm.
trade in the Kashmir wool,
Right.
which was now sort of replacing cotton as the next big industrial product, which the
Mm.
British wanted to exploit. So I think that answers your first question about why they did not rule over the land. And the second question, if you can please say it again very quickly, then I'll respond.
Imposition of law, the British law.
Yes, yes. So in most cases, the British law was imposed. The British did force people to come to their courts. They did force, and gradually, as I mentioned, between Young and Emerson, Young in 1826, Emerson in 1911, the attitudes had hardened much more. Especially after 1857, the attitudes, they became very, very hardened, and the British were not ready to accept the local laws. But initially, the British, you know, they showed a tendency towards towards respecting local laws, and also, but most of the times when they used these laws, they were used for their own, to serve their own interests. So so that's when the local laws were employed. When the British knew that, when the colonial masters knew that the employment of the local ways of justice will help them in their own in their own expansion.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. Any other questions anybody wants to ask?
Okay.
Okay, so there are no hands raised. So I guess we can call it a wonderful lecture. We had a lot of questions, and down the line, I will be giving a talk on shamanism in the Western Himalayas, and I've really learned so much today about what you talked about ritual politics. And we do have a hand raised. So Ramya Bansal, please ask your question.
Hi, thank you very much for your talk, Dr. Ravi. My question is with regards to the changing social.
I'm sorry, I've lost your audio.
Sorry. My question is with respect to, say, the constitutional identity of the Jaunsaris. So how does the divine in itself observe or relate to such change in, you know, the political aspects of the identity to the people?
Mhm. Okay, so yeah, so the divine continues to rule as the Devtas were doing in the past. But the Jaunsaris themselves have become very, very aware and very possessive of their identity as a tribe. Uh, of course, a lot of the other people in the cult, other communities that also subscribe to Mahasu as their Devta, uh, are quite unhappy that the Jaunsaris got the tribal status while the others did not. And they're still constantly lobbying for that. In fact, Himachal Pradesh also, I think, has a commission, which consulted me briefly about the other communities, whether they deserved the tribal status or not uh, in Himachal Pradesh. Of course, the Jaunsaris are only in Uttarakhand, and the other people who have a very similar culture around the Jaunsaris do not have the status. So I think the divine is it seems is quite unaffected by this change of status for the Jaunsaris, but the community itself. So what had happened with the tribal status is that the Hindu caste society was uh, immediately labeled as a tribe, and so the Rajputs and the Brahmins and also the lower castes like the Koltas and the Bajgis, they were all unilaterally they became tribals after the status was changed. So my observation is that over the years, the benefit of the tribal status has gone to the creamy layer, so it has helped the Rajputs, and the Rajputs are the dominant caste, so it has helped the Rajputs and the Brahmins in certain ways to corner most of the benefits that the tribal status was supposed to give to the community. Now, so the community in itself uh, uh, is very protective of the status, but in the case of the divine, I have been party to a lot of the consultations and a lot of the possessions by the oracles and a lot of uh, uh, you know, but I have never heard the mention of the word tribal or debates on this whole issue. So the devatas continue to rule over the entire community as they were doing earlier. Um, because in a way, if they were to start going into these issues, then then I think for them it would also be a kind of silent acceptance the of today's rulers as the de facto rulers of the territory, which they still do not uh, uh, recognize. So they still do not recognize the claim of the government of India over many of these territories, and therefore they would not. I have never seen Devatas going into this issue of tribal status.
Right. Thank you very much,
And
Dr. Ori.
yeah,
Just to follow up on that,
yeah,
like there's an increasing demand of such statuses across India, right?
yeah.
Because it's
Mm,
not just one specific geography, but in a lot of other cases, there is a demand of having this scheduled
mm.
statuses by a lot of different communities. So how does in like how do you foresee like how should we kind of balance that out? Say, for example, even within the SCs and the STs both, like there's
Mhm.
an overwhelming demand to receive that, of course, because of the benefits involved. But how
Mhm.
does that change the internal, the how how people themselves would view themselves in terms of the larger context of the larger population?
Yeah, so these are very complex issues that you're outlining, but they are very significant issues also because uh, so I have looked at the issue from the John Sari point of view, and when I speak of this particular community. Um, so the act itself lays down certain conditions that if these conditions are fulfilled, then the claim of a particular social group to a tribal status or to the SC status or uh, to the OBC status is acceptable or should be considered. But it also brings in it with it in its wake a lot of complexity. It brings in its wake a lot of issues for the community itself. Like for instance, I just mentioned in the John Sari community, the Poltas, the conditions of the Poltas and the Bajgis, who were the lowest of the lowest rung in the in the mm, in the community are still quite bad. They're still do not, because they simply do not get benefit of even a basic education. Therefore, they have no claims of on the reservations provided by the ST status. Whereas the Rajputs and the Brahmins can afford to send their kids to Dehradun or to other cities, to Shimla, and get even if they get a basic education, the job is easily available to them. So in that sense, I find that um, that these claims and counterclaims create uh, lot of complexity, a lot of issues are there, because even with the John Saris, you have communities in Himachal, communities that also subscribe to the Mahasu cult, uh, and they have very interesting websites. They have made very interesting representations to the chief ministers and even to the prime minister. That, like, they have even led delegations to the prime minister saying that we also practice black magic, we also practice polyandry, we are also superstitious, we are also backward, give us the tribal status. Now when a community starts saying those things for itself, I guess we are entering troubled waters. So there is a lot of there are lots of complex issues which need to be considered very, very carefully before any such changes uh, should be made. To my mind, we should as far as possible desist from making these changes. That's my personal opinion on this issue.
Right. Thank
I
you
would just
very
like
much.
to thank
Yeah.
Vibhaji, because Vibhaji has written a comment saying that we met in Tübingen, remember? Yes, of course, I remember. We met in Tübingen, Germany, while you were teaching at the university and I was visiting. So thank you, Vibhaji, for joining. Over to you, Sonali ji.
Thank you. So I'm really very happy that we had this talk today. And I have a kind of an echo here. We have two people sitting here as well with their phones on. I do want to make a couple of announcements before we depart. So next week we have Dr. Salima Ikram. She's an Egyptologist, a distinguished professor of Egyptology in the American University in Cairo. She will be talking about temple rituals in ancient Egypt. And it's very interesting because having studied Egyptian archaeology, while studying Egyptian archaeology, there's so many similarities that we see in temple rituals and the whole pantheon of gods and goddesses in ancient Egypt. It's so important to kind of have this parallel kind of understanding of two great civilizations. So I thought it would be very important to have Dr. Ikram talk about some aspects of the afterlife, and of course mainly about temple rituals in ancient Egypt, even though they don't pertain to the Himalayas, but it gives us insights into things that we see here as well. And another note, she is the only Pakistani archaeologist who worked in Egypt, and I'm the only Indian archaeologist who's worked in Egypt. So everybody, whenever they would see us together, they would say, oh, the only time India and Pakistan are together and friends is when Salima and Sonali. So I hope all of you who are here present, you join us next week as well at 4 p.m. with Dr. Ikram. And I'm really happy, Dr. Ori. I'm looking forward to getting your book for our library, and I hope once the coronavirus wanes, you can come here and give a lecture. I've got so many plans, and we keep talking with Dr. Kaushal and Vibhaji and Dr. Kapila. They're so enthusiastic, and I really need all your support into making the Himalayan Institute a cultural hub and a center for academics and non-academics. So I hope you can.
Thank you. Sure, we will definitely come together and work together for the center, and I would love to visit.
Yeah, and
Thank you very much for having me.
I think Vibhaji has a note. She says, in Fustat, we found 14th century cloth fragments from Gujarat. In fact, there is another site where I have worked called Deb Tunis in the Fayoum, where we found a cloth of indigo and human seeds wrapped in it. So there was trade, of course, not only during the Ptolemaic and the Roman period, but much before that as well. So thank you all for being here, and we've got a lot of static. So I guess we can bid goodbye, and I will be posting this video very soon on YouTube, and I'll send the link to you, Dr. Ori. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Shonali. As usual, I tell you, we don't know where to go. It's wonderful. Every lecture is better than the other. Huh? Amazing.
All thanks to all of you. Thanks to all of you for creating this forum where we all are together in it. So
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So, Shonali, look forward to next Sunday. Salima Ikram. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye. Ori, thank you so much. Thank
Bye,
you.
ma'am.
It was wonderful. It was
Nice.
wonderful to listen. Thank
And
you.
I will send you the text of the talk as well, so that, you know, some questions that you want to mull over and include in your writings, I'll just send a text for that. Okay.
Right.
Bye.
There are 16 more chats.